And
Great.
what I always ask people to do is start at the beginning so you can tell me who your family was or where
Okay.
they came from.
I'm Dr. Tom Butt, a retired dentist from Withfield, Virginia. I was born and raised in Pocahontas. Went to school here. I graduated in 1953. My father's name was Herbert. My mother's name was Frida. She was a Sharretts. My father's father was William Butt, who had the first home in Pocahontas. First child born was by William Butt, and the child's name was Minnie Pocahontas Butt. And my father and his brother Charlie had a hardware store and automobile parts store in Pocahontas called Butt Motor and Hardware Company. My Uncle George had the Chevrolet agency. He had the Purina agency, owned 2 filling stations, was a world traveler. He sold the first mobile home I ever saw. George Butt sold it there on Main Street. Unfortunately for George, he had would love to have a drink or two in the evenings. He had a bench out in front of his store, which would be George Butt Garage. And the new policeman came to town and said, "Listen, you got to get out. We're going to take you to jail. You're out here." He says, "No, this is my place. I own this place." And so he had a little scuffle, and the guy hit him in the head, and he fell against the car bumper and killed him. And the policeman had to go to prison over that.
And we are back on.
Okay, my father's store was next to the Cricket, which was a saloon. Back in the early days, there was 27 saloons in Pocahontas, and the only liquor store in the whole area was in Pocahontas. So if you lived in Bluefield or Bramble or someplace else, you had to come here to get your booze. And so the Cricket was a gambling place, and they had 4 or 5 nice pool tables in there. Of course, if you wanted a beer, you went in there, and it was a good place to go. Had a very famous pool shot whose name was, hold on, come on. Oh, I can't think of his name right off, but it'll come to me. But anyway, I was one day standing on the edge looking into the pool hall, and there was a bunch of guys lined up in chairs and stools, and this guy just fell over dead right there. And they didn't seem to be bothering anybody. They just kept on shooting pool, and finally they came and drug him off, and I don't remember the guy's name, but Knowles was the very famous pool shot. I saw him run 5 or 6 racks of balls without even missing a shot many times. And he always drove a big Cadillac convertible. Count Knowles is what they call him. But a lot of great places. They had the Playhouse across the street from Butt Motor Hardware Company. And the Playhouse was owned by Grieve Foster, and Grieve is a good buddy of mine. He was the same age as my dad. In my dad's class in high school, there were 2 people, an Ellett and Mr. Ellett and my dad Herbert. And Mr. Ellett was a valedictorian, and my father was a salutatorian back in those days. And anyway, Grieve Foster had the Playhouse, and it was also a pool hall. And you go up to his office. It was about 12 or 15, 14 or 15. He had it full of all kinds of things to collect. And at one time, Grieve had a pair of monkeys, and somehow the monkeys got loose, and they were all over the place in the trees. They never could catch them again, and I guess during the winter they may have frozen. But I was about 10 years old, and he asked me what I'd like to have, and I said, "I'd like to have a crow." "What are you going to do with the crow?" And I said, "I'd just like to have one. I've heard you can make them talk." So he said, "Well, we'll get you a crow." So sure enough, a crow showed up in a box about 3 weeks later, and we didn't know what to do with this crow. And so my dad tied a string around the crow's leg, and of course the crow tried to fly away, and if it did, it pulled its leg off and he died. So that crow didn't last too long. Well, let's see. When I was a kid, I used to slip out of the house about 10 o'clock at night. I was probably 12, 13, 14 years old. and I'd walk over to Rosenbaum's Valley, where there's a colored guy named Fred who had hound dogs, and he liked to run in foxhounds. And I'd get over there and stay almost all night. We'd build a fire, and he'd give me a chew tobacco, and I'd spit tobacco, and then before daylight, I'd make it home. I'd take it back home and go into the house, and my folks didn't seem to mind. So that was a lot of fun doing that. We used to have kind of gang wars, the whites against the blacks. We didn't have really that many blacks, but the famous person from over here in Pocahontas is C.I. Gilmore. And C.I. had spent some time in prison for, I think, had to do with drugs, I'm not real sure. But he was in charge of the black folks, and my brother and his buddies were in charge of the white folks. But all we really did was throw tomatoes at each other. We didn't do anything too destructive. Pudding Johnny, let's see, work. Let me get my glass. Hold it just 1 second.
Okay, I'll stay.
All right, ready to go again.
Yep.
When I was in high school, I lifeguarded at Falls Mills for 6 or 7 years. Every summer, we wouldn't miss a day. And Falls Mills is probably about 6 miles from here. And one night we decided to walk from Pocahontas to Falls Mills. It took us about all night long to get there. It was about 8 or 10 hours. Had no place to sleep when we got there, so we just got up on the Coca-Cola machine and fell asleep, or a bench. And that was a lot of fun also. At that time, I had a little girlfriend named Mary Lane McGinnis, and Mary Lane was from Bosavane, and she lived up about 5 miles up in the other direction towards Yabbs Valley. So I was up there one night, stayed a little longer than I should have, and I decided I'd better try to get a ride home. And so I started walking and walking and walking. Not a car came by. And the further I got, the blacker it was. You didn't even see the white on the road for the lines. That's how black it was. I ended up walking all the way from Bosavane to Pocahontas one night. We used to do a lot of camping over at Rosenbaum's farm. And we'd carry these great big heavy sacks. The sleeping bags weighed about 10 pounds. And we'd carry some Venus sausages and stuff like that. I know one time we were over there, and it was about time to pick corn. So we got in this guy's corn row and took 8 or 10 ears of corn and cooked them that night. We had a lot of fun doing that. Camping we did a lot of. We maybe 2 or 3 times a week we'd go camp and put up a tent. Lots of times it'd just be in the backyard, but we had a lot of fun. We, during the wintertime, they would let us snow sled from the top of Main Street all the way down to the railroad station. And it would be, you could pick up 35, 40 miles an hour going down that road to all the way to the train station. Then you'd take you about 35, 40 minutes to walk back up there. But that was a lot of fun. Back in those days, we had a lot of snow too. We don't have much snow anymore. My dad had a little Jeep that he drove all the time. And a lot of times he'd take me to school up on top of the mountain. And as we get along, all the kids would wave and he'd stop and get another one, we'd get on and another one. And before we got to school, we'd always be 6 or 8 of us in his little Jeep. I know when I was very young, my grandmother lived in Whitfield, Virginia. And in Whitfield, her mother was an Umberger, and my grandmother was a Kegley. And my grandmother married a Sherritts, Thor Thomas Joseph Brown Sherritts, TJB Sherritts. And he was quite a musician. He played violin and taught at the Shenandoah Conservatory of Music. So on about every other weekend, we'd go to Whitfield to visit my grandmother. And I had a terrible motion sickness. I'd get sick. I got almost